Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Role of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Education event for Blockchain Week. We have Mark Gustowski, Philippe Coulen, Leesa Soulodre, and Lalitha Wemel. Thank you so much for speaking at Blockchain Week. We're excited to hear from you, and I will let you take the stage.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and country throughout Australia, and we recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about the role of innovation and entrepreneurship in education, which has been quite a hot topic of late, certainly with the COVID pandemic affecting a lot of the education institutions globally. But more importantly, I have three great people that I will introduce you to shortly. Just so everyone in the audience knows, all the microphones are currently on mute. We are recording the session, but if you do have any questions, please type them into the chat that exists there, and we'll go through those questions. Actually, we'd love to have questions from the audience, because we're really here to hear from you if that's possible as well. My name is Mark Gustowski. I'm the Managing Director at Innovation Architects and also General Partner at Mandalay Venture Partners, and have been working closely with some of the team in Blockchain Australia for some time. I have three fantastic panel members with me today: Leesa Soulodre from R3I Capital, Lalitha Wemel from Techstars, and Philippe Coulen, who's also a partner at Innovation Architects. Before I dive into the session, I might hand over to each of you to introduce yourselves briefly. Maybe Lals, you first, just to talk about what you do and some of the, I guess, experience you've had in innovation and education, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It is a pleasure to be part of this. I will keep it short because I know we have only 30 minutes to dive into such a big topic. But as Mark introduced, I am Lalitha. I'm the Regional Director of Community at Techstars. Techstars, for those of you that don't know, is an investor and an accelerator. We do all kinds of programs around the world focused on entrepreneurship and founders. Myself particularly, I work with our community team where we build a ton of experiential education programs that are aimed towards early stage entrepreneurs. So I've been with Techstars for 6 years, but prior to this, I've actually been working with my parents who also run a mobile education startup. So education has been a big part of my own startup and entrepreneurial journey for many, many years, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Brilliant, thank you, Lals. And Lals also sitting in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia at the moment. We are going to jump over to Singapore, where Leesa is sitting, where R3I Ventures is located. Leesa, over to you for a quick intro about what you do. And you're on mute, so you just have to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Hi, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for the invitation to join you at Blockchain Week. Super excited to be here and really excited to join in the conversation. I'm the general partner of R3I Capital and also the founder of the House of X, which runs a House of MedTech and a House of Deep Tech, both in Luxembourg and in Singapore. I've spent my career on the bleeding edge of deep technology innovation. I am the entrepreneur in residence to the Australian and the Canadian governments. And when I'm not here living on the bleeding edge, I'm an adjunct faculty member of Singapore Management University, IE Business School, and moonlighting currently at SMU Cox in Texas. So really good to be part of this conversation. Thank you, Mark.
Incredible. Thank you, Leesa. And we're going to fly south to Brisbane, where Philippe Coulen is currently sitting. Phil, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thank you to Steve and Amy Rose and the Blockchain Australia team for having us here. A little bit about myself. I'm a partner at Innovation Architects, as well as a general partner at Mandalay Venture Partners. So working quite intensively in the innovation, startup entrepreneurship and investment space. I have a particular passion, interest, and sort of my background more in early stage entrepreneurship and grassroots community building and ecosystem development. So I've been active over probably since 2013-14, active in building the sort of first wave community co-working spaces and startup communities within cities. I've been connected for several years with Lalitha at Techstars, where I've done a lot of work with the community team and Startup Weekend. For the last 5 years, I was the head of startup programs for an entity, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Queensland University of Technology, where we developed a large offering of support services for students and for the broader startup ecosystem, supporting across the entire entrepreneurial journey, from sort of education, idea concept, to establishing startups and growing businesses, and finally investment. So that's what I'm bringing to the table, sort of community ecosystems and the in and out of being within university environments.
Thanks, Phil, Leesa and Lal. So just to frame some of this discussion, some of the issues we are looking at globally at the moment is the need to increase the power skills. A lot of people call them soft skills. I think I like to call them power skills because I think that is a better description of what they are and how they relate to entrepreneurship and innovation, particularly in traditional institutions, education institutions, who are finding it quite challenging to keep up with the pace of technology. And if you certainly look at blockchain DLT, you see that universities have had a lot of challenges keeping up with the pace at which the technology is moving. We're moving towards lifelong learning as well. So less and less towards people jumping in and doing degrees and courses, and moving towards lifelong learning, I guess, chapters within our own lives where we continue to learn, whether you're founders or employees or consultants. And the question is now, how do we educate ourselves? How do we educate providers? How do institutions educate founders moving forward? What's the role of accelerators, community organizations in the broader spectrum of education? And so with that framework in mind, and again, please feel free to drop any questions with the expertise you have at the panel into the chat. I'm just going to ask Phil, and if you keep your answer maybe to 3 or 4 minutes, what is the changing face of education in Australia? And what have you seen as you've now worked across a number of universities in what they're trying to do to drive awareness and participation towards tech and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Obviously a big question, and probably try to unpack from my own experience. So changing landscape of education, I think, is in short, trying to keep up with the rapidly changing environment in which we all live, right? And acknowledging that in the first place, larger organizations have difficulties doing that because typically they are slower moving machines. One thing we've seen, which is, I guess, playing to, or that we're seeing in Australia and all over the world, I'm sure, that is playing to all the things you just said, from student skills to universities remaining relevant in a fast-paced and fast-changing environment, is universities setting up innovation and entrepreneurship departments or cells or organizations within their universities. And that's been done basically by any university, by all universities in Australia at the moment. And there are different models which are being employed in doing that. Is it internal to the university? Is it part of a particular faculty? One of the logical sort of basis for these things are typically the business schools, where these things end up happening. So entrepreneurship departments are the new business schools, or the other way around, I'm not sure. Other ways we've seen that happen is through, and that's probably a bit more forward thinking, is to look at partnerships with external organizations that may enable that for the university, and that's a little bit harder to do, and it's giving away sort of part of the control that maybe the university has over that. One thing we've seen from our own experience, and that's from QUT Creative Enterprise Australia, is being part of an organization, part of a company that is a private company but wholly owned by the university, which was a really beautiful way of supporting entrepreneurship, innovation, education, culture, and commercialization and investment through a vehicle that exists at arm's length, an organization that has one foot in, one foot out of the university ecosystem, which has been very successful in being able to bridge the in and out. And I think one of the things that is not spoken about very often, because it's sort of behind the facade of all the accelerator programs and student programs and incubators and competitions and whatnot, is actually for these organizations to help as an extension of the university to build a position within the entrepreneurial or the innovation ecosystem of a particular city or a particular state or of the country. It's helping with potential partnerships and opportunities to drive new industry-led programs, new types of education, new types of experiences that can be delivered to the students, and that's a huge part that sits behind sort of whatever is visible of a university. And when we're talking about I guess the changing landscape and how universities can adapt to that. Well, one of the easy answers is, well, it's a complex environment. You need to be playing within an ecosystem, and you need to be participating within an ecosystem to be able to see some of these opportunities emerge as part of those things. And having an organization at arm's length that can do that for you is a great way to do that. A few other things that come to mind, because my answer is already quite long now, but we're seeing these innovation entrepreneurship programs really exist for increased student success and student experience. So all the skills that you mentioned, Mark, that's an obvious one, a no-brainer. Different needs, changing needs. I want to go to university, but I want to build my business at the same time. Can I do that in parallel? Does the university offer me to do that? Links to the commercialization opportunities of the university, and obviously a big sort of promotional and branding opportunity for the institutions themselves as well. And the final thing that I want to say, and this is, I'm seeing this, and I'm seeing this in the entire Australian ecosystem with varied success and varied commitment. Is the whole concept of the third mission. It's how universities play a crucial role and continue to play a crucial and relevant role within the socio-economic environments they exist in, beyond, sort of the traditional education and building talent for those ecosystems. So yeah, and we're seeing it all over Australia.
Awesome, thanks, Phil. Leesa, innovation and entrepreneurship education isn't just about students, it's about lifelong learning. And you're currently running 2 accelerators concurrently out of Singapore into Luxembourg, which is certainly no mean feat. And you have corporates that are involved, you have founders that have founded multiple companies, but they keep coming back because of the need to continually understand and learn about the latest trends, technologies, and thinking. What are you seeing across Asia and also into Europe around the needs for lifelong learning, and how is R3I and also the household programs working towards that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Mark. And Philip, I really appreciated your context, because too easily we try to put things in boxes and segment them, as opposed to appreciating the value contribution that we play in the overall ecosystem and how each component brings value to the other. Mark, to your question about lifelong learning, in R3I and the House of X, we play a unique role in being able to tailor and customize our founders' journey to help them land and expand internationally, but very personalized and curated to their own company and its own objectives. As you can appreciate, when you do that on scale, that's highly resource intensive, and it requires significant international competencies. I'm lucky to have half of the people on my team as some of the world's best academics from across some of the world's best universities, in addition to a team of highly capable venture capitalists and serial entrepreneurs. So I think it's that culmination of the education component in addition to the capitalization component and the commercialized component that brings that all together. But I also play a role, as you know, in the university, and I teach at MBA, EMBA, and executive education levels. And I believe wholeheartedly that what I need to achieve in deep tech commercialization, it's a long journey, right? It's 2 million in 2 years in a general tech company. It's X million in Y years if that experiment is going to work or not. And so we need a long-term program in order to deliver our objectives. And so that's why the House of MedTech and House of Deep Tech has been specifically purpose-built to incubate as opposed to just accelerate. So I really want to distinguish the two. Accelerate is where you go for a very short period of time to skill up and then go back out into the ecosystem. Incubate is where you literally come to live with us for as long as you wholeheartedly need in a digital context so that you can build scale globally. You don't have to leave us. And then I just want to say is I believe it's that combination of bringing in those important intensive exec ed style components to our program, built in collaboration with the world's best academic institution, that gives our founders the edge. We're not teaching them what to think, we're teaching them how to think. And it's those mental models that help them to get the agility in the field. So I hope that's a little bit more transparent about the way in which we work. Ours is really comprised of 4 key components. Of course, the customized curriculum that is personalized to the individual needs of every company and its business model, its goals, and its needs. The second is that capitalization piece, where we're actually having to go out there and test whether or not this idea is really going to work. Obviously, you can't do that without money, and you need the right partners at the table that have the risk appetite to let you experiment and either fail or succeed. And then the third component of that is that network of ecosystem partners, taking it from tech readiness level 5, dirty demo in a lab, to hardened and commercially ready in the field. As I mentioned, it's X million and Y years, but we also need the right commercial, corporate open innovation partners to help us make that happen. Too often founders are subjected to what I call selfie corporates, those that just want to greenwash the agenda and are not really interested in the founders and the value that they could contribute, but rather just in the PR that it brings to their market cap. We're really careful about finding those partners that are going to really help scale those companies across their value chains. And then finally, what we see as a pivotal component is that regulatory piece. You know, regulation is your legal and regulatory license to operate, and getting that know-how and understanding in an academic context is often not provided. And so being able to bring in that really important regulatory piece, which is very dynamic, as you saw in the early regulatory panels here today, to the table so that the founders are literally compliant as they go, is really a core fundamental piece of the advantage.
Wonderful, thank you, Leesa. And over to Lals. Techstars is a fairly enormous organization in terms of its awareness globally that has touched, I don't know, you must have been involved with thousands and thousands of founders and wannabe founders. How's Techstars navigated this new education paradigm and innovation demand, and what methods or new methods are you seeing used in the edtech space for founders to learn more about blockchain or DLT ledger or others?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I just want to say I agree very wholeheartedly with everything that's been said. I want to start by saying one of the things that I think Techstars has looked at as a perspective, and what Phil and Leesa touched on, is how universities are an actor, but it should not be the main component. They should not be looking at being the be all and end all of building entrepreneurship, because the more collaborative they can be with all the different players of an ecosystem, the more successful they're going to be. And it should never just be like a business school that focuses on entrepreneurship. They should find ways of implementing an avenue for entrepreneurship in all different kinds of studies and depths of education, because that's really where you're going to get a wide range of expertise that can then come in with new and innovative ideas. If we're just focusing on the business students and their business ideas, we're only going to end up with very focused, very one kind of opportunities that arise from it. One of the things I think that Stanford did really well is incorporating that in every aspect of it, right? They gave that the opportunities of entrepreneurship, not just to the business school. They literally created a completely different entity that anybody could then apply to. And because of that, this is a really old statistic. It's like from 2015, but even in 2015, Stanford had already developed over 40,000 companies. They had created, close to over 5 million jobs, and generated a revenue that was worth $2 to $3 trillion. And that is literally from ensuring that they are not siloing themselves as a university. They are making sure that as a university, they are a point of density where all the different parts of an ecosystem can come together and play in an incredibly experiential way. And that is, I think, the future of education, where you are not looking at just normal, you get this degree and you're off to go. You get this master's program and you're off to go. You get this qualification and you're off to go. It's not even a certification of an accelerator. It is the community and the network that you continue to build and you continue to develop as you progress. And that is one of the things that Techstars does really well, in that, yes, we have accelerators. Yes, we have, very entry-level programs, but since the pandemic, one of the things that we have been focusing on is that experience into bridging the gaps between the different programs that we have, because that's really where we can ensure people really feel that progression, that affinity into continuing to be within our network and find value in it. Because just getting that qualification, just getting that certificate is no longer enough. And it's no longer enough as a person. When you're going through a program, that's not going to get you very far anymore. It is truly about the way that you're leveraging the community that you're building and how the people within it are able to authentically and easily connect with each other.
Yeah, that's you've made some incredibly important points there, Lals, that I think there are multi-players in this space that need to have a key role. We did have a question pop in from Philippe Coulen. I'm not sure where you're located, Philippe, but you talked about, or you asking if there are any government grants that would be recommended for startups or people looking to apply the blockchain framework to existing industries. If you are in Australia, then there are things at each state level that might vary. There are some incubator support grants. There are LaunchVic grants in Queensland. There are Ignite grants. Federally, there are Commercialisation Australia grants. Lals, Leesa and Phil, you can jump in. How are you seeing the support landscape for funding, particularly in relation to blockchain in your government agencies or your entities? Maybe Lals first.
Oh, I'm going to be a terrible person to answer this particular question because I have been really out of touch with what is happening in the funding landscape of blockchain and stuff in Malaysia specifically. But I do know that it is taking off a lot in Singapore. So maybe I will pass it over to Leesa.
Yeah, in Singapore, it's quite huge. We have the FinTech Association of Singapore, which provides grants for digital transformation and also for software reimbursement. So depending on how you're buying in your blockchain, there's ample early stage support money here to help you get started. In Luxembourg, providing you have a Luxembourg entity and you're reasonably capitalized, there is a plethora of funding available. It's the only country in the world that I know of that has too much money. But the lovely thing about Europe is you have a pathway of 80 billion euros to be invested in innovation over the next 5 years. And there's at least 15 million euros under the EIC for any company to both transform and also to commercialize as part of the European Investment Commission. One thing I would say is if you are putting your deck forward, make sure you've got a few fantastic women on it or a diverse cognitive team. If you have a team that's just packed with Aussie blokes, I'm afraid you're not going to make it. It's a fundamental priority for the European Union to diversify and to proactively include women in this agenda. So a quick tip.
Brilliant. And as you'll see, the smartest ones on the panel here today are not Phil and I. But Phil, another question did come in that says, how do I get started? And I think the best thing are groups like Blockchain Australia, where you can actually touch base with the entity that's responsible for really driving awareness. But Phil, how else do you get started if you're just coming into the community?
I mean, that's a really good question. I just wonder where you're coming from. If you're someone with an idea, someone who wants to find information, educate yourself, or if you have a business that is looking to get funded. So not quite sure what the question actually is. But I mean, in the essence, getting started in this space, in innovation space and technology is the same, is always looking back at the community and at the existing ecosystem. So I suggest always going to, look up who the co-working spaces are, who the innovation hubs are, what the existing meetup groups are around particular technologies, what the engineering faculties are doing in terms of groups for data science students, blockchain, blockchain enthusiasts, and other things. It's finding a community, it's finding groups, finding a tribe where you can learn and find and navigate that space through those connections.
Yeah, in Australia, I guess there are some government grants out at the moment that are specifically for blockchain, and you can find those on some of the Department of Industry pages. Phil, I can't recall exactly what they are, but they are specifically blockchain grants that are available right now. And so that will answer that question if you do look and find them. There was a question coming from Robert about social entrepreneurship dimensions to the tech startup space. It's got relatively little attention. We probably don't have enough time to cover all of that. But it's probably fair to say that social entrepreneurship, ESG, and impact investing is becoming an increasingly important part of the startup ecosystem. There are funds now that are popping up that are just looking at social investment. Leesa, do you want to say anything about that quickly?
I just want to say we're an impact fund, and 1/5 of the world's money is impact connected. So absolutely make sure you've got your impact story right. And if you go to impactbeacon.org, I think it is, you'll be able to calculate your impact right here and now.
Yeah. And Phil, I think you've had some involvement in some impact related activities also. Phil's also just put a link in the chat for some specific blockchain grants that I think are currently live, which you can have a look at. I know that Steve from Blockchain Australia has been integral in working closely with the government on actually getting those grants up and actually looking at how they go. I think we're coming up to almost the end of the session. There is another question there. Lals, yep.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to address the question really quickly to say that it is really important to involve academics like from the get-go. It's not just about implementing processes that you think are going to work. If you're not going to give education and the right kind of support to the people that are going to execute those programs and make sure that the students have everything that they need, it's not going to work. So getting them involved from the get-go, planning, bringing them to network, getting teachers educated from the start on this new way of education is just as important as finding a new way of education.
We've got such an interesting question here that we could go on forever, but we're out of time. It is about how do we incentivize academics to be more entrepreneurial. Can of worms, that one. There's no easy answer to that, besides finding some academic champions and freeing up some of the IP positions that sit within universities and rewarding commercialization instead of just publication. Whole different set of discussions. Wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Leesa, Lals, and Phil for your expertise and also being champions of the community, not just in Australia, but in Singapore, in Europe, and also in Malaysia. Wanted to also thank Blockchain Australia, the Algorand Foundation, and Block 8 for providing support and sponsorship for today's session. Follow Blockchain Australia. Steve's doing wonderful things. Join up if you can, and keep an eye on the events taking place, because we're going to continue to help build this community. To the three of you, thank you. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everyone.
Lals, Leesa.